If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more captivating narratives like this one. Your support means everything to us. Now let's dive into Melissa's journey. The crystal glasses clinked with an elegance that belied the tension hanging in the air. Melissa Bennett shifted uncomfortably in her seat, the mahogany chair suddenly feeling like a witness stand. Her mother's pearl necklace caught the light from the chandelier above the dining table as she exchanged a knowing glance with Melissa's father. The roast beef remained untouched on their Wedgwood china. "I don't understand," Melissa said, her voice barely above a whisper. The words her father had just spoken hung in the air like poison. "You can't be serious." Charles Bennett placed his napkin beside his plate with deliberate precision. His silver hair and tailored suit gave him the appearance of respectability that Boston society admired. But Melissa saw only coldness in his eyes. "We've indulged your lifestyle choices long enough," he said, his tone clinical. 27 years old, and what do you have to show for it? A job at a nonprofit that barely pays your rent. Turning down every suitable match we've introduced you to. Her mother, Eleanor, didn't even look at her as she added, "Your father and I have decided it's time for you to understand consequences. Either you accept the position at Bennett Properties and the introduction to Jonathan Whitmore's son, or you consider yourself a stranger to this family." Melissa felt her chest tighten. The ultimatum shouldn't have surprised her. For years, her parents had treated her career choices and independence as a phase, something she would eventually grow out of. But this was different. "So that's it?" Melissa stood, her chair scraping against the hardwood floor. "Either I become exactly who you want me to be, or I'm disowned." Her father's expression remained impassive. "You have until the end of dinner to decide." Melissa looked around the dining room she'd grown up in. The portraits of Bennett ancestors stared down at her with the same cold judgment she saw in her parents' eyes. The weight of generations of expectations pressed down on her shoulders. With trembling hands, she placed her napkin on the table. "Then I guess I'm a stranger," she said, surprised by the steadiness in her voice. "Goodbye." As she walked toward the door, her mother's voice called after her. "Once you leave, don't expect to come back. We won't be here to catch you when you fail." Melissa paused at the doorway, turned slightly and said, "For the first time in my life, I don't expect anything from either of you." The heavy door of the Bennett mansion closed behind her with a finality that echoed through her body. Standing on the steps of her childhood home, Melissa felt the cool autumn air against her face, carrying the scent of fallen leaves. She looked up at the stars, barely visible through Boston's light pollution, and took her first breath as a woman truly on her own. 1 week later, Melissa sat cross-legged on the floor of her modest apartment, surrounded by cardboard boxes. The space was a far cry from the opulence of her parents' Beacon Hill mansion, but the worn hardwood floors and exposed brick walls of her South End apartment felt more like home than anywhere else had. Her phone buzzed with another text from her friend Taylor. "How's the unpacking going? Need reinforcements? I have wine and zero judgment." Melissa smiled despite herself. Since the dinner, Taylor had been her rock, helping her move the few belongings she'd had in storage into this new place. She'd been staying in Taylor's spare room for the past week while apartment hunting, making progress. Wine always welcome. "Come by after 6. She set down her phone and returned to unpacking a box of books when her laptop chimed with an email notification. Probably another job listing from the search she'd set up. With her savings, she had maybe 3 months before finances became truly concerning. Stretching across the floor, she pulled her laptop closer and froze when she saw the sender. Livingston and Partners, her parents' attorneys since before she was born. The subject line read, "Urgent, Bennett Family Trust, immediate attention required." Melissa's finger hovered over the delete button. Whatever game her parents were playing, she wanted no part of it. But curiosity, always her weakness, won out. She clicked. "Dear Ms. Bennett, we urgently request your presence at our offices regarding matters pertaining to the Bennett Family Trust, of which you are the legal beneficiary. This matter requires immediate attention as it affects significant financial holdings. Please contact our office at your earliest convenience to schedule an appointment. Regards, Jonathan Livingston, Eskier Livingston and Partners." Melissa read the email 3 times, trying to make sense of it. Beneficiary? She knew her parents had established trusts for tax purposes years ago, but they had never mentioned her involvement. This had to be some kind of mistake. Or worse, a trap. She was still staring at the screen when Taylor arrived, bottle of red wine in hand. "You look like you've seen a ghost," Taylor said, setting down the wine and peering at the screen. "Livingston? Isn't that your parents' lawyer?" Melissa nodded. "They say I'm the beneficiary of some trust. It doesn't make any sense." Taylor uncorked the wine. "There's only one way to find out. Go to the meeting. And walk right into whatever scheme they're planning? No thanks." Taylor handed her a glass. "Listen, what's the worst that could happen? You go, hear them out, and walk away if it smells fishy. Besides," she added with a smile, "I happen to have an uncle who specializes in trust law. You could bring him along." Melissa took a long sip of wine, the rich flavor doing little to settle her nerves. "You think I should go?" "I think knowledge is power," Taylor said. "And right now, they have it all." The next morning, Melissa called the number in the email. The receptionist's voice was crisp and efficient as she scheduled an appointment for the following day. "Mr. Livingston has cleared his schedule for you, Ms. Bennett." He emphasized the urgency of this matter. Urgency. The word lingered in Melissa's mind long after she hung up. What could possibly be so urgent about a trust she'd never even known existed? The offices of Livingston and Partners occupied the 23rd floor of a gleaming tower in Boston's financial district. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered panoramic views of the harbor, a visual reminder of the firm's position at the pinnacle of Boston's legal establishment. Melissa stepped off the elevator, Taylor's Uncle Robert beside her. He'd agreed to accompany her as a professional courtesy, though he'd made it clear he couldn't formally represent her without reviewing the documents first. "Remember," Robert said quietly as they approached the reception desk, "say as little as possible. Let them do the talking." The receptionist led them to a conference room where Jonathan Livingston waited. He was younger than Melissa remembered, though the streaks of gray at his temples were new. He stood when they entered, his expression revealing a momentary surprise at Robert's presence. "Melissa, thank you for coming on such short notice," he said, extending his hand. "And Mr. Caldwell, I wasn't aware you'd be joining us." "I'm here as a friend of the family," Robert replied smoothly. "I hope that's not an issue." "Not at all." Livingston gestured to the chairs. "Please, sit." As they settled, Livingston opened a leather portfolio. "Melissa, I'll be direct. You are the named beneficiary and controlling trustee of the Bennett Family Real Estate Trust, established by your grandfather in 1987. Melissa blinked. "My grandfather died when I was 3. I barely remember him." "Yes. Edward Bennett was quite the forward thinker," Livingston continued. "He established this trust with specific conditions. The beneficiary would gain control on their 27th birthday, but only if they had demonstrated independence of character and sound judgment, as determined by the initial trustees, your parents." Robert leaned forward slightly. "And they determined she met these conditions?" "They filed the certification last year, shortly after Melissa's birthday," Livingston said, sliding a document across the table. "It's all quite standard. The unusual aspect is that Melissa was never informed." "What exactly does this trust control?" Melissa asked, finding her voice. Livingston cleared his throat. "Approximately 70% of Bennett Properties' real estate holdings. The portfolio includes commercial properties throughout New England, valued at approximately $147 million. The room seemed to tilt. Melissa gripped the arms of her chair. "That's impossible. My parents would never willingly give up control of their properties." "That's just it," Livingston said, his voice lower now. "They didn't understand the full implications of the trust structure. Your grandfather was thorough. The properties were placed in the trust, but your parents retained management rights as trustees until you turned 27 and were certified as meeting the conditions." Robert was scanning the documents with the intensity of a hawk. "And now?" "Now, the Internal Revenue Service has frozen all assets pending Melissa's formal acceptance of her role as trustee, without her signature on these documents." He tapped a thick folder. "Bennett Properties cannot access any funds from those properties, make transactions, or pay certain obligations." Melissa sat back, the pieces finally clicking into place. So that's why they need me now. Their empire is frozen unless I sign. Livingston's expression remained neutral, but his eyes betrayed discomfort. Your parents requested I arrange a dinner tomorrow evening to discuss the situation. They're eager to reconcile. A bitter laugh escaped Melissa's lips. Reconcile. Right. Robert gathered the documents. We'll need time to review these. Of course, Livingston said. But I should mention, there are time-sensitive matters pending. Tax obligations, mortgage payments. Then they should have thought of that before throwing their daughter out, Robert said coldly, standing. We'll be in touch. As they left the building, stepping into the bright autumn sunlight, Melissa felt as though she were walking in a dream. The bustling city continued around her, oblivious to the seismic shift in her reality. What happens now? She asked Robert as they walked toward the parking garage. Now, he said with the hint of a smile. We use the time they don't have. You absolutely cannot go to that dinner alone, Taylor insisted, pacing around Melissa's apartment later that evening. Robert had spent hours reviewing the trust documents and confirmed what Livingston had said. Melissa indeed controlled a vast fortune, and her parents were essentially at her mercy. I won't be alone, Melissa said, holding up a legal pad filled with Robert's notes. I'll have knowledge, and that's more than they think I have. The next evening, Melissa stood outside Sorellina, one of Boston's most exclusive Italian restaurants. Through the window, she could see her parents already seated at a corner table. Her father checked his watch, a gesture she'd seen countless times growing up, usually accompanied by disappointment in her tardiness. She smoothed the front of her simple black dress, not one of the designer outfits her mother had always pushed on her, but an elegant piece she'd chosen herself. Drawing a deep breath, she entered. The maitre d' recognized her immediately. Ms. Bennett, your parents are waiting. As she approached the table, her mother's face transformed into a practiced smile. Melissa, darling, you look healthy. Her father stood, offering a stiff embrace that felt more like a business greeting than a reunion with his only child. Thank you for coming. We have much to discuss. Melissa sat, acutely aware of the other diners, Boston's elite, many of whom knew her family. This public setting was no accident. Her parents were counting on social pressure to keep the conversation civil. I've reviewed the trust documents, Melissa said without preamble, declining the wine her father tried to pour for her. A flash of surprise crossed his features before he recovered. Yes? Well, it seems your grandfather created quite a complicated situation. Nothing we can't sort out as a family, of course. A family, Melissa repeated, the word tasting strange on her tongue. Last week, you told me to consider myself a stranger. Her mother's smile tightened. Darling, families have disagreements. We may have been hasty in our words. Hasty, Melissa echoed. Is that what we're calling it? Her father leaned forward, lowering his voice. Melissa, there are serious financial implications here. The IRS has frozen assets that are critical to our operations. Several major development projects are at risk. Our operations, Melissa noted. Our projects. But according to the trust, they're mine now. Legally, perhaps, her mother said, her voice honey-sweet but her eyes cold. But you must understand, you don't have the experience to manage such holdings. The sensible approach is to sign the management rights back to us while retaining your beneficiary status. You'll be well taken care of. A waiter approached with menus, but Melissa waved him away. I'm not staying for dinner. Don't be ridiculous, her father hissed, his facade cracking. We need to resolve this situation. I have the documents right here. He reached for his briefcase. Melissa stood, placing her napkin on the table. I've spent my entire life trying to earn your approval, trying to be the daughter you wanted. But I was never going to be good enough, was I? Not unless I gave up everything that makes me who I am. Melissa, her mother whispered urgently, eyes darting around at nearby tables. People are watching. Let them watch, Melissa said, her voice steady. Let them see that you only wanted me back when you needed something from me. Her father's face hardened. You're making a mistake. Without our guidance, you'll lose everything. You don't have the first idea how to manage these properties. Maybe not, Melissa agreed. But I know people who do. People who won't treat me like an asset instead of a daughter. She turned to leave, then paused. Oh, and Dad? Don't bother sending more documents. My lawyer will be in touch. She walked out of the restaurant with her head high, feeling the weight of stares but also the lightness of liberation. Outside, the cool evening air filled her lungs as she took her first deep breath in what felt like years. Her phone buzzed with a text from Taylor. "How's it going? Need an extraction?" Melissa smiled as she typed her reply. "Already extracted myself. Coming to your place. This story needs wine." As she walked toward the nearest tea station, Melissa realized she was smiling. For the first time in her life, she held the power in her relationship with her parents, and she had no intention of giving it up. 3 days later, Melissa sat across from Robert in his office, reviewing a stack of reports on the Bennett Properties holdings. The trust controlled 23 commercial properties across New England, including office buildings, retail spaces, and several development projects in various stages of completion. "The good news," Robert said, removing his reading glasses, "is that the trust itself is financially solid. Your grandfather structured it brilliantly. The bad news is that your parents have been using these properties as collateral for other ventures not covered by the trust. So when the assets froze," Melissa began, "their house of cards started to collapse," Robert finished. "They've been borrowing against these properties for years, essentially treating them like an unlimited credit line. Without access to those funds, they're facing margin calls on several loans." Melissa leaned back in her chair, trying to process the implications. "What are my options?" Robert laid out 3 scenarios. Sign everything back to her parents with no conditions. Negotiate a compromise that would give her parents limited access while maintaining her control. Or do nothing and let the financial consequences unfold naturally. "If I do nothing, what happens to them?" Melissa asked. "Based on these financial statements, they'll likely lose their personal properties. The Beacon Hill house, the place in the Hamptons, the chalet in Vale. Their lifestyle will be dramatically affected." Melissa thought of the mansion she'd grown up in, the cold formality of its rooms, the pressure that had permeated every corner. And the employees of Bennett Properties? The trust properties will continue operating. Those employees are secure. It's your parents' peripheral ventures that are at risk, and the people who work for those companies. That evening, Melissa sat on her apartment floor with Taylor, surrounded by printouts of corporate structures and property portfolios. "I never wanted to hurt anyone," Melissa said, staring at an organizational chart. "Especially not people who just happen to work for my parents." Taylor handed her a glass of wine. "So focus on protecting them, not your parents." "How?" "You control the trust now. You can make decisions about how those properties are managed. Maybe there's a way to protect the employees while still holding your parents accountable." The next morning, Melissa called Robert with a plan. By the afternoon, they were meeting with the management team of Bennett Properties, most of whom had never met the daughter of the owners. "Ms. Bennett," the CFO said cautiously after she outlined her proposal, "this approach would effectively separate the trust properties from your parents' other ventures. It would stabilize operations for the trust holdings, but it would do nothing to help my parents' financial situation," Melissa finished. "I understand. Is it legally and financially viable?" The team exchanged glances before the CFO nodded. "Yes. Unusual, but viable." "Then that's what we'll do," Melissa said, surprising herself with her confidence. "Draft the necessary documents." That evening, her phone rang with her father's number. She hesitated before answering. "What do you think you're doing?" he demanded without greeting. "Our management team says you're restructuring the entire operation." "I'm protecting the employees and properties in the trust," Melissa replied calmly. "Something you should have been doing instead of using them as your personal piggy bank." "You have no idea what you're talking about," he snapped. "This business has been in our family for generations. You'll destroy everything we've built." "No, Dad. I'm saving what Grandfather built. You're the one who put it at risk." There was a long silence before he spoke again, his voice lower now. "Melissa, please. We can work this out. Come to the house tomorrow. Just you and us. No lawyers, no business talk. We're still your parents." The plea caught her off guard. Despite everything, a part of her, the little girl who had always sought their approval, wanted to believe them. "I'll think about it," she said finally, and ended the call. "You're not actually considering it, are you?" Taylor asked when Melissa recounted the conversation. "I don't know," Melissa admitted. "They're still my parents." Taylor took her hand. "Just remember who they were when they didn't need something from you." The federal auction of the Bennett Mansion on Beacon Hill drew a crowd of Boston's elite, many of whom had attended parties in those very rooms. Melissa watched from across the street as the auctioneer's gavel fell, marking the final sale of her childhood home to a tech entrepreneur from California. 6 months had passed since that fateful dinner. 6 months of legal maneuvers, financial restructuring, and personal growth. Melissa had declined her father's invitation for a private meeting, choosing instead to communicate through Robert. Her instincts had proven correct. The reconciliation had been another attempt to pressure her into signing away her rights. As the weeks passed and Melissa stood firm, her parents' financial empire began to crumble piece by piece. The properties outside the trust were seized by creditors or sold at distress prices. The luxury cars, the art collection, the memberships to exclusive clubs, all gone. Meanwhile, Bennett Trust Properties, now officially separated from her parents' other ventures, was thriving under new management. Melissa had taken a seat on the board, but hired experienced executives to handle day-to-day operations. She had established a foundation with some of the proceeds, focusing on affordable housing initiatives in Boston, a direct counter to her parents' luxury development strategy. "Ms. Bennett?" A voice broke into her thoughts. A young journalist stood beside her, notepad in hand. "Would you care to comment on today's auction?" Melissa smiled politely. "No comment, thank you." As the crowd dispersed, Melissa's phone buzzed with a text from Robert. "Just received word. Your parents are moving to their condo in Florida. Significantly downsized from their previous lifestyle, but comfortable. Thought you'd want to know." She slipped the phone back into her pocket without replying and began walking toward the public garden. The autumn leaves crunched beneath her feet, their vibrant colors a reminder of how much had changed since that dinner almost exactly 1 year ago. Finding an empty bench, Melissa sat and watched children play near the pond. A sense of peace settled over her. Not the victorious satisfaction she might have expected, but something quieter and more profound. Her phone rang, displaying Taylor's number. "Did you see the news?" Taylor asked without preamble. "Your parents' place just sold for $15 million. "I was there," Melissa said, "watching from across the street. How do you feel?" Melissa considered the question. "Free," she said finally. "I feel free." That evening, Melissa hosted a small gathering in her new apartment, a spacious but not ostentatious place in Back Bay. Taylor was there, along with Robert and his wife, and several colleagues from the nonprofit where Melissa still worked 3 days a week, despite her newfound wealth. As they shared stories and laughter, Melissa slipped away to the balcony for a moment alone. The Boston skyline glittered before her, including several buildings now under her stewardship. She thought about her grandfather, a man she barely remembered but who had somehow seen this moment coming. He had created a safety net that became her liberation. She wondered if he had known his son would become the man her father was, or if he had simply hoped his granddaughter would become the woman she now was. A gentle knock interrupted her thoughts. Robert stood at the balcony door. "Everything okay?" he asked. Melissa nodded. "Just thinking about choices. My parents chose their empire over their daughter. In the end, they lost both. And what did you choose?" She smiled, looking back at the warm gathering in her living room. "I chose myself, and somehow that led to everything else." As she rejoined her friends, Melissa realized that the inheritance her grandfather had left her wasn't just the properties or the money, it was the chance to define herself on her own terms. The true wealth was in the freedom to choose her own path, surrounded by people who valued her for herself, not for what she could give them. In choosing herself, she had finally found home. If you enjoyed this story of empowerment and personal growth, please don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Your support allows us to continue bringing you powerful narratives like Melissa's journey. Thank you for listening.